Hi everyone, welcome to the N3AS seminar this week. Today we are glad to have Dr. Kanji Mori as our speaker. Kanji obtained his PhD from the Department of Astronomy, University of Tokyo earlier this March, and is currently a postdoc at the Research Institute of Stellar Explosive Phenomena, Fukuoka University. He has worked on a variety of topics related to Big Bang nucleosynthesis, type 1A supernova, stellar evolution with physics beyond the standard model. For the next half an hour or so, he'll be telling us about interesting recent work on exploring axion-like particles with nearby supernovae. If you have any questions during the talk, please type them in the chat window or use the raise hand button. We also have additional time for informal discussions later. So, all right, Kanji, please take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Sophia. Hello, I'm Kanji Mori from Fukuoka University, and I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk here. And today I'd like to talk about my recent work on action-like particles from supernovae. So this is the contents of my talk. So first, I'd like to introduce action-like particles, and after that, I would like to talk about action-like particles from some stellar object. So in the second part, I will talk about actions from nearby supernova progenitors, which are massive stars that are about to collapse. And then I will focus on action-like particles from core collapse supernova explosion itself. So I'd like to start from the standard model of particle physics. So as you know, the standard model is a successful theory for the most fundamental level of nature. And this table is a list of elementary particles in the standard model. And as you know, it is thought that our world is made from these particles. However, this model is not the ultimate theory. For example, this list does not include the gravity, so we need some quantum theory of gravity. And also, observationally, we know that these standard model particles can explain only 5% of our universe, and the rest is called dark matter and dark energy, and the nature of them is unknown. So in order to understand this dark matter and dark energy, we need to explore some physics beyond the standard model. And also we know that experimentally neutrinos have some finite mass. However, in the standard model, neutrinos are treated as massless particles. So in order to understand neutrinos, we need some extension of the standard model. And action-like particles are one of such beyond the standard physics. So they are a class of unknown pseudo-Navier bosons, which are associated with some new human symmetries. And there are many particle models which predict such action-like particles. For example, historically, action-like particles were first introduced to solve the so-called strong CP problem in QCD, and also the compactification of the spacetime in the string theory also provide this kind of action-like particles. And also, there are other many particle models which I'm not so familiar with that predict action-like particles. And from the point of view of astrophysics, action-like particles are important because they are candidates of the dark matter. And it is so that action-like particles can couple with photons, and the interaction is described by this Lagrangian. And this coefficient G is a coupling constant between axions and photons. And this G and the axion-like particle mass has been explored experimentally and astrophysically. And these plots the landscape of the parameter space. So vertical axis shows the coupling, and the horizontal line shows the mass, and the left panel focuses on light axion-like particles lighter than 1 electron volt, and the right one focuses on more massive one, heavier than keV, heavier than keV. And it is seen that the astrophysical object has provided a lot of information on action-like particles. For example, this purple region and this orange and green regions are constrained by supernova 1987A, which is a recent nearby supernova. And also this hatched region and this blue region comes from the stellar evolution. And this blue region comes from the direct search of the action-like particles from the sun. And in order to get some idea of this kind of astrophysical arguments, we pick up some of them and see the detail about those. For example, Supernova 1987A have provided a lot of information on axions. And for example, gamma rays are very important observable, which may originate from action-like particles. And if supernova produces a lot of axions, it can action-like particles propagate in the interstellar space. And because of the interaction with galactic magnetic field, a part of action-like particles can be converted into photons. And this photon, or gamma ray, may be observed by the gamma ray telescope on the Earth. And observationally, it is known that the gamma ray of from supernova 1987 is supernova 1987 is lower than this value. And on the other hand, theoretically, it is predict. So on this plot, this color shows a theoretical prediction of action gamma rays that originate from action-like particles. And this white line corresponds to this observational upper limit on gamma rays. So you can see that if the parameter of action-like particle is in this region, the non-detection of gamma rays can becomes inconsistent with the observation. So they concluded that this region is excluded by the non-detection of gamma rays from supernova 1987A. And also, action-like particle can affect some stellar evolution. And in general, action-like particles can accelerate the evolution of stars. For example, this table shows the time scale of helium burning in some low-mass stars. And these numbers shows the time scale of helium burning. And this G is a coupling between action and photons. And it is seen that this time scale becomes shorter when they increase coupling between action and the photons. And this kind of prediction can be compared with the observed stars in globular clusters. And this comparison have provided some constraint on action-like particle parameters. And also, action-like particle can affect the evolution of massive stars. So this plot shows Hertzsprung-Russell diagrams of massive stars around 10 solar mass. And the upper panel is the standard model. And the lower panel adopts some coupling of action and photons. And it is known that in the standard model, massive stars experience this kind of loop on the HR diagram during its helium burning. However, it is seen that this loop is really affected when the effect of actions are included. So, and in principle, this difference can provide independent constraint on action-like particles. And this kind of arguments have been performed by a lot of authors, and this is just a list of previous studies, and this is not a complete list, and I'm sorry if your name is not on this list, but this is very biased. So as we have seen, quark-collapse supernova provide some information on action-like particles, and also stellar evolution can be affected by action-like particles. And some experimentalists are trying to detect directly action-like particles from the sun. And also there are other astrophysical methods I cannot show you here. And the good point of this astrophysical argument is that these objects can achieve extreme environment which are far beyond the terrestrial experiment. So they may provide some tight constraint on action-like particles. On the other hand, we cannot control these objects. So there should be some large systematic uncertainties on in the results. So I believe that it is important to propose independent methods to explore action-like particles, and this is the motivation of my study. And the most important process that produces actions in the stellar plasma is Freeman process, and in this process, thermal gamma ray and background electromagnetic field of electrons and ions creates one actions, and its rate is between like this. And we can just integrate this in terms of energy, and the result is here. And this shows the emissivity of actions per unit volume and time. And it is seen that this emissivity is a step function of temperature. So we need hot astrophysical plasma to produce a lot of actions. So in this study, I look for such environment which have hot astrophysical plasma that can be action-like particle factories. So I'd like to move on to the second part. So in this part, I focus on supernova progenitors, which are massive stars at the last stages of its evolution. So this is just a very simple picture of action-like stellar evolution. So the vertical axis shows the central temperature of the star, and the horizontal axis shows the central density. And when the star is less lighter than 8 solar mass, the star will end its life as a white dwarf. On the other hand, if stars are more heavier, it will create iron core as the center at the end. And because iron cannot produce heat by fusion, the star will collapse. And finally, they will explode as a core collapse supernovae. And it is seen that massive stars experience a hot high temperature at the end of evolution, and I will focus on this part in this study. And again, this plot shows a central temperature and density of 20 solar mass stellar model, and it is seen that temperature becomes very high at the end of its evolution. So I expected that this kind of massive stars at the end of its life, I mean, in oxygen and silicon burning phases, may work as an action-like particle factory. And this is on the other hand, there are around 30 supernova candidates within 1 kiloparsec of the solar system. And this is a map of such supernova candidates. And if one of them really at the end of its life, and one of them, if one of them really collapses as a supernova, and it may work as an action-like particle factory. And unfortunately, it is extremely difficult to detect action-like particle directly. However, action-like particles are converted into photons by galactic magnetic field. So as a result, gamma ray may be observable. And its conversion probability is written like this. And I just plotted this P as a function of distance from the star here. And here I assume that the galactic magnetic field of around 1 microgas. And it is seen that this P is actually tiny. However, in principle, gamma ray may be observable by gamma ray telescopes. And unfortunately, it is difficult to predict the core collapse of massive stars. However, recent progress of recent development of neutron detectors may provide pre-supernova alarm using pre-supernova neutrinos. So this shows cumulative neutrino numbers as a function of time before the core collapse. And each line shows different neutrino detectors. And it is seen that these neutrino detectors may find pre-supernova neutrinos about 10 to 5 seconds before their collapse. So it may be possible to perform target opportunity observations of gamma rays before their core collapse. And if we can do so, we may be able to find signatures of pre-supernova actions. So in order to calculate action-like particles from the star, we have to prepare a stellar model first. So here I adopted parameters for Betelgeuse as a benchmark model, and I used MESA code to prepare a stellar model. And I assume that stellar mass of 20 solar mass, and the distance to the Betelgeuse is a little bit uncertain, but I assumed this value 170 parsec following this recent literature, and I assume the galactic magnetic field of 1 microgas. And first, I calculated gamma ray spectra from the supernova progenitor, and here I assume that the star is really about to core collapse, so it is really at the end of its life. And so this is the result. So it is seen that the spectrum is really dependent on the action mass. However, the peak of spectrum is around 1 to 5 MeV. So in principle, they may be observable by MeV gamma ray telescopes. And also, we see some irregularity in spectrum, and this is caused by some oscillation in this photon action conversion probability. And we can integrate this spectrum in terms of energy to get the flux from such a star. So I calculate the flux here, and as a function of time before the core collapse. And the upper panel adopts the coupling constant of this value, and the lower panel adopts this value. And this 0.05 is almost the current frontier of constraint on action-like particles. So, and the black one adopts the action mass of 0.1 MeV, and this red one adopts mass of 1 nanoelectron volt. And this horizontal line shows the sensitivity of gamma ray telescopes. This integral is now working, and AMEGO is the next generation gamma ray telescope. And it is seen that gamma ray flux increases as a function of time because the temperature becomes higher and higher as the star evolves. And so it is seen that when we are lucky, the gamma ray may be observable if some parameters are very nice. And in order to look for this kind of signature, target of opportunity observations following pre-supernova neutrino alarms are desirable. So in summary, if we are really able to perform this kind of observation, it may be possible to obtain the information of action-like particles in this region on the parameter space. And that was the second part of my talk. And I'd like to move on to the final, the third part of this talk. So here I'd like to talk about action-like particles in quark-Laplace supernovae. So as we have already seen, supernova 1987A have provided a lot of information on actions. However, previous calculations were mainly post-processing. So, and the supernova models and action-like particles were just decoupled. However, recent development of gravitational wave detectors and neutron detectors will provide a lot of information on supernova explosion mechanism. So in order to understand the effect of actions on these multi-messenger signals, we need supernova models coupled with action-like particles. So now I am trying to construct such models which are coupled with action-like particles. So before going to the detail, we have to review the mechanism of supernova explosion. So in the final phase of quark massive star evolution, iron core is formed. And because iron core cannot produce energy by fusion, it will collapse at the end. And when the density of the core reaches the nuclear saturation density, then the matter becomes very stiff and burn shock is appears. And this burn shock should be able to propagate through the star to make a successful explosion. And if the shock reaches the surface of the star will be observed as supernova explosion optically. However, there's a problem. In order to have successful supernova explosion, the shock should propagate through the star. However, in 1D simulations, the burn shock just stalls, and we cannot get successful explosions. And this is one example of such simulation. So this shows a shock radius as a function of time, and the different line correspond to different supernova code. So it is seen that the shock is just stalled, and so these models cannot reproduce successful explosion. And this is because now the material is accreting on the proto-neutron star, and the material is photodisintegrated, and this process is endothermic process. So this works as a cooling process. On the other hand, neutrinos are emitted from the proto-neutron star. So the shock is heated by neutrinos. However, in 1D simulations, this shock is not revived by this neutrino heating. And this is a long-standing problem in supernova physics. And it is known that multidimensional effects like convection and some hydrodynamic instability helps the supernova explosion. However, the reason why this shock is really stored is still an open problem. And in order to construct the supernova models coupled with actions, we adopted this code, and we consider Prima process and photon coalescence as action production processes, and we consider inverse Prima process and radiative decay as a action absorption process. And we start from this equation. So F is the flux of actions, and this Q cool is the action production rate, and Q heat is the action absorption rate. And this action production rate, Q cool, is determined locally, so it is easy to calculate this. However, Q heat is determined non-locally, so it is a little bit difficult to calculate this Q heat. So in order to calculate this one, I discretize this equation to get this one. So I means number of the cell, and we can just solve this recurrence formula to get this Q heat. And if once we get this Q heat, then we can just modify the internal energy. So we can just add this Q heat to the internal energy and subtract this Q cool. And this is just action-like particle production processes. So we have already seen Prima process. And actually, we consider this photon coalescence as well in this study. And this process becomes important when the action-like particles are heavier than 100, about 100 MeV. So this is very preliminary result on of supernova simulation coupled with action-like particles. So I assumed the action mass of 200 MeV and the coupling constant of this. So and this shows Q cool and Q heat as a function radius. And this Q cool is the action production rate, and this Q heat is the action heating rate. And it is seen that action-like particles are produced around 10 kilometer. And this particle goes outward and propagates for around one mean free path. And then it will be absorbed by the material. And when it decays, it heats the matter around this particle. And this works as a heating process. So, and this, as we can see, action-like particles can work as a heating process. So, in principle, they may help the revival of the stored shock. And this shows the radius of shock as a function of time. And it is, and this solid line shows the standard model without action-like particles. And it is seen that in the standard model, the shock does not propagate to the outward. So in this model, the star does not explode. However, in some model with action-like particles, we see some revival of the shock. And this is because even in the standard model, neutrinos can hit the shock. However, in these green and red models, we consider additional heating due to the actions. As a result, we are now seeing the shock revival in the supernova. So this is still very preliminary, but action-like particles may help the revival of the shock. And for now, we are now exploring this region, this white region, and this still it is ongoing. However, the action-like particles in this range may help the supernova explosion. So this is a summary of today's talk. So astrophysical objects such as supernovae offer unique opportunities to explore action-like particles, and observations of nearby supernova progenitors with next-generation gamma-ray telescopes may provide an independent information on actions. And actions in some specific parameter region may significantly affects the explosion mechanism of core collapse supernovae. So that's all. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kanji, for this really nice talk. Please, if you have any questions, either raise your hand or type your question in the chat so that Kanji can answer them. Or feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. I might have missed something. When you talk about the last piece regarding the effects on the explosion mechanism, you looked at these axion-like particles with mass of 100 MeV.
Yes, yes.
And I understand that you talk about this production mechanism, but if I think about the energy scale, I mean, what make this production of these things efficient? Because the mass is much larger than the typical temperatures you have in the supernova.
Yeah, actually, the temperature around here is about 70 MeV or 60 or 70 MeV. So,
You talk about the deep inside is a neutron star?
Yes, yes. Deep inside the supernova core. So temperature is not so low.
Okay. So, and then these things typically, they almost can freely escape?
Not so freely.
How long they can go? You're looking at it like a close to 60 kilometers, so they can move.
Yeah, the mean free path is when the parameter is around here, the mean free path is around 100 kilometer.
Mm-hmm. So okay, so I understand the scenario now. So you have a very hot interior of the protoneutron star responsible for the production, and they can move quite a bit before they sort of decay back or do other things. All right, thank you. All right, and are there any kind of experimental control of constraints of any kind on this type of axion-like particles? I missed the detailed comparison before because it's very hard to read.
I didn't mention any experiment, and unfortunately, it is difficult to constrain this region by experiment. However, I'm not a specialist on experiments. However, experiment using colliders now can constrain the actions around here.
Okay.
But yeah, this is a little bit different region.
Very nice. So this is a sort of like a consistent, I mean, because you use a different coupling constant, so it's kind of hard to read. The coupling constant you use quote like 40 or something, what units would be corresponding to the vertical axis?
Okay, so sorry, I didn't mention that. But this G10 is
10 to the minus 10. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it. All right. Okay. So then wouldn't that be in the? Oh, okay. There'll be too large, isn't it?
40 is around here. Here 10. So G10 of 10 is 10 to 9 minus 9. So
yeah.
I assumed 40, for example.
Oh, okay.
So it is should be around here.
So you have an upper corner there. So I was looking at the lower left. Okay, you have an upper right corner, which is sort of like which you blocked out with the red symbol there. I see. Okay, so now that's fine. So okay, that's the region you're of interest. It's interesting. All right, very good. And now go back to your very first thing regarding the cooling part. You're talking about the progenitor, right? So what are the range of the parameters you're looking at there? In terms of the mass.
The mass of lighter than nanoelectron volt.
Nano? Yeah. NeV?
NeV, yes.
Because that's the vast range of the energy scale. That's what confused me. So I thought initially, because you were talking about the progenitor, the temperatures can go maybe close to 1 MeV or so in the interior. So then suddenly in the supernova, you go talking to 100 MeV. So that's a very different energy scale there. And so in this particular case, I understand your interest is that most of these things supply the cooling of the progenitor, and they just mostly escape freely from the core. I mean, from the entire sky, essentially,
Yes,
right?
correct. Yes.
And you
Yes,
convert
yes.
them into gammas on the way to detector somewhere, and by the galactic magnetic fields.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Okay. Okay, very good. So how about this then? How does this production of these very light axion-like particles in the stellar interior can affect the evolution of the star itself?
I don't think that this parameter region does not affect stellar evolution very much because the luminosity is too low, and
Okay.
it is lower than neutrino luminosity from stars. So I don't think that this affects
orders of
evolution.
magnitude, for example. All right. Okay, that's
Yeah,
very nice.
yeah.
And then the kind of gamma signal is already strong enough for potential detection. Is that the kind of a interesting implication here? Even though the
Yeah.
cooling doesn't dominate, but the gamma ray signals are significant enough.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. I think I understand.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Thank you.
great. Okay.
Time for more questions, comments. Actually, I have a very naive question. Can you please show the summary slide of the different? Yes, this one. Sorry, the previous one.
Previous.
Sorry, this plot. Can you say a bit more about the upper orange band, the energy loss?
This one. Okay, so
How
I
is derived
don't have
or
a picture. No, sorry.
improved, the constraints
okay.
improved.
Okay, so when axion-like particles are in this region, then it is because the coupling constant is very high, the luminosity of axion-like particles from the supernova core becomes too high, and in that case, a lot of energy is conveyed from the neutrino sphere to the outer region. And if in such situation, and on the other hand, we know that luminosity from the neutrino luminosity of from supernova 1987A. So and they claim that when the neutrino loss, energy loss due to axion-like particle is too much, then they may prevent the neutrino burst from supernova. So, and in that case, that that contradicts with observation neutrino luminosity from supernova 1987A. Sorry, this is a little bit. I'm a little bit
so
confused.
I think you mean the observed energy loss due to neutrinos cannot exceed the prediction from including axion emission, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so axion-like particles cannot prevent the neutrino burst. That is their argument.
Can axion emission also affect the remnant? I mean, if there is a neutron star left, this the star will be cooling, right? Axions can be emitted.
Yeah,
and the temperature of the neutron star may be affected by this mechanism.
I am actually, this is very preliminary, so I have not discussed that prospect. But yeah, in principle, they may change the remnant. Yeah, for example, remnant mass may be different. But yeah, sorry, I have not checked it in detail. Yeah, but in principle,
great.
it is possible.
Okay.
Because they change the hydrodynamics of supernova explosion.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Prakash, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I have a question. In the case of supernova 1987A,
Yes.
the remnant mass was estimated to be around 1.6 solar mass, baryon mass. So it's a little 1.5-ish gravitational mass. Now, suppose a neutron star was left with 1.8 solar mass. Would that help axions?
Sorry, I didn't get your point, but
Would the mass of the remnant protoneutron star, if it were larger than that in supernova 1987A, would it help the axion emission?
I think the axion emission Kanji showed production is sensitive to the density in the core, right? And
yes,
Prakash
that's right. Yes.
may be asking if you have a heavier neutron star born, is that going to help axion emission? Is that what the question
I
is
see.
about? For example, supernova 97A may have a remnant of canonical mass, like 1.4, 1.5 solar mass. If there is another supernova with a remnant of 1.8, 1.9 solar mass neutron star, will the axion emission be different?
I see. Yeah, in principle, it is possible, but I have not performed this calculation with, other progenitor models. So I cannot say anything, quantitatively. And but this production is really sensitive to the temperature. So when we use different supernova models, we may get different results. So it may be possible that the result is different when the remnant neutron star mass is different. But sorry, I cannot say something clear. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Something to think about.
For the future, right?
Some future
Yeah,
project.
for the future, something to think about.
I am now trying to discuss the effect of axions on neutrino signals and gravitational wave signals.
So is there a reason that you only choose one progenitor mass? Sorry, another naive question.
No, this is just because this is still very preliminary, but I want to try another progenitors in the future, of course.
Great, very nice. Any other questions, comments people may have for Kanji?
Can I ask you a quick question, Sophia?
Please.
How does the axion signal impact the neutrino signal? What's the coupling?
Actually, I have very preliminary results here. So this is a neutrino luminosity, electron neutrino luminosity as a function of time. So yeah, in some model, it is reduced by a factor of a few, maybe.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry. So here is a very preliminary result on the effect of axions on neutrinos.
So this is if the argument is that if the axion takes away the energy, then not much energy will be left for neutrinos. Is that the argument?
Yes, that is an argument by these ones.
Okay.
Yes.
I wonder if there is a more direct coupling. Sorry, go ahead, Yang.
No problem. Bob, finish your thought. Finish your thought, please.
No, I was wondering if there is a more direct coupling between axions and neutrinos. That's perhaps too far.
I see. I do not know about the action neutrino coupling. Sorry, maybe some particle physics knows better.
Okay, Kanji. So my question here is that, I mean, is it a potentially observable deficit of things? I mean, look at this. Stay on the same figure, which you're showing there. That this is an electron neutrino, right? Because
Yes,
the spike for the breakout and all
Ah,
that.
yeah, that's okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. Okay, so this is electron neutrino, and the time scale you showing here is the accretion phase already over at by the end, or accretion phase is still going on for the supernova model you were looking at?
The material is still accreting. Yes.
It's still accreting. So indeed, this is actually not only the luminosity from the diffusion of the neutrinos out of the neutron star. There's also newly created neutrino, anti-neutrino by the accreted material, basically on the outskirts of the neutron star, right?
Yeah, but I have not studied this result in detail. But yes, I think so. Yes.
Yeah. So this actually that looks a bit of a strange to me, because my impression is that during the accretion phase, the electron neutrino and the anti-neutrino luminosity is pretty much dominated by the accretion induced emission, right? And because your mass for the Axion-like particle is so large, they can only be produced inside the proto-neutron star. Seems to me they will only be influencing the diffusion part of the luminosity, and so will be less responsive to the accretion part of the curve. If the accretion is still going on, then I would expect that basically it's purely powered by how much matter you're going to pile on to the surface of the neutron star, where there is no release of these particles.
I see.
Because it's a bit strange. I mean, I said
maybe the answer is in the fact that the temperature increases and the axion emission is very sensitive to the temperature. I'm just guessing.
It's 200 MeV, Prakash. On the surface of a neutron star, no matter how you do, you cannot emit these things.
I know it's what do you call it, a factor of 2 only.
Yeah.
So week multiplied by week multiplied by week.
But anyways, it's an interesting kind of a thing you're showing here. I'm just having trouble understanding this, because it seems to me if the accretion got shut off and then the diffusion flux really start to dominate, I can believe that, because you just have a fewer.
I don't know what went into this model calculation, so I can't really say.
Yeah, and if you look at the blue curve on the top, it's very flat. So that sort of signifies that it's still during the accretion phase. Basically it's pumped up by the accreted material, right? And once you put in this axion-like particle cooling, and it's somehow that it automatically drops down below like that. So it's a little bit of a, unless somehow diffusion flux is contributing a lot to this model. Otherwise it's not very understandable to me.
I see. Sorry, I haven't shown this result to anyone. This is very preliminary, so I have not.
Yeah, I understand it. So, but it's an interesting observation, and I'm just puzzled by that. So.
Yeah, I will explore this. Yes.
Yeah. Right.
All right, I do not see any more questions, hands up. So let's thank Kanji again for this.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Talk. And thank you everyone for coming, for the great questions. We will see you next week. Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Kanji.
Thank you very much for your comment.